Everyone, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be the final cheat sheet of Matchday 1 World Cup Fantasy. Yes, of course, there's going to be some friendlies still. There's still going to be a little bit of information in terms of potential injuries, but I'm hoping that this is at least 90 to 95% of the full picture of kind of our good understanding of Matchday 1 and how to approach it. I'm taking the assumption that a lot of us are going to wildcard 3, on Matchday 3 that is, and that's why you kind of see a close concentration to Matchday 1 and Matchday 2 as fixtures. One thing to kind of mention in terms of the cheat sheet is that this is sort of based on my projected sort of minutes of certain players. I'm taking into account some potential rotation in Matchday 2. This would be in a very, very niche case. Like, for example, teams like Spain and Uruguay could rotate Matchday 2 in an attempt to kind of put out a stronger team for Matchday 3. But what we're doing here is using a mixture of the domestic club numbers of certain players and then kind of balancing that off against what I understand to be their national team roles, and then of course their history in terms of their performance for the national team. So I'll add some context in there if necessary. Whilst we're at it, I actually wanted to shout out the Sport.fun mini league that I'm actually running. It's called 1,000 USD worth of free prizes on top of the 30,000 free prizes that you get for signing up for the Sport.fun World Cup fantasy game. It's completely free to play. You don't have to do anything in particular. Don't have to even give your payment details. You just build a squad of 8 players, then pick 5 picks every single week for each tournament, which correlates to Matchday 1, Matchday 2, that sort of thing. So if you click build your squad, I've already built my squad. So it's going to be a different screen for you where you just get to select your players, but I've already kind of made my players. So if I kind of click on my squad here, this is my full squad of players. I've got Haaland, Bruno, Cucurella, Schlotterbeck, Havertz, Wirtz. So clearly targeting mostly Germany, and then Haaland, who's kind of an essential pick for me. Bruno, probably a little bit more of a balanced pick, but one of the best midfielders because a lot of the kind of usual midfielders are priced as forwards in this game. And I've gone with Kobel and Nyland, who I think just have solid clean sheet odds in Matchday 1. And then you can kind of enter into these tournaments where I've got my 5 picks for this week in Kobel, Cucurella, Wirtz, Haaland, and Havertz. And that's what I'm planning to line up with this week. Before we jump into the cheat sheet, I actually want to mention that the support has been absolutely fantastic for the World Cup Fantasy videos. I'd really love to get to 50,000 subscribers before the end of the World Cup. So if you can support, please do like the video, subscribe, and even drop a hype as well. It really does help support the growth of the channel. The cheap options that we have right now, I would say, are going to be CDK from Belgium and Ben Doak as well from Scotland. Tecatelaere, I think, is someone who you will see as playing in the center forward position for Belgium, but I think it is a position that is unnatural to him. So yes, of course, classic case of someone who's technically out of position as a midfielder playing in the forward position, but I'd probably argue he doesn't look super comfortable there, hasn't looked amazing in the friendlies. And I do think that Lukaku, even though he's expected to come a little bit later in the tournament, could still get some minutes as well. So this is not someone who has perfect minutes. I also think in terms of pen share, yes, we've seen him take a penalty over De Bruyne, but I think in a full sort of competitive match, I'd probably expect that De Bruyne is actually going to take a penalty over him. I could be wrong, but I'd probably have it 70% De Bruyne, then 30% CDK. And then at that point in time, you're sort of relying on his open play returns. And Belgium, to be fair, have a relatively nicer group, but maybe the toughest fixture is going to be Matchday 1 for them. So not exactly the best option for me. Ben Doak would just be purely a punt on Haiti in Matchday 1. Why you'd need to sort of spend the money or waste the midfield position on him, I'm not quite sure. I just don't think it's really worthwhile. So I'd probably skip past him unless you're really kind of confident that he'll be able to get a return versus Haiti. The next tier actually has a lot of top tier players. So this is the 6 million price point. I have James Rodriguez still as a top option. The key thing with James Rodriguez is that his minutes are not perfect, right? So he's more of a 65-minute player for Colombia, maybe a 70-minute player. I still think he'll actually start most of the games in the groups, at least until maybe they're qualified, because the key thing for someone like him is that he's a little bit older. He's not really been able to kind of put out any good domestic seasons. He's kind of like almost a Shaqiri-esque player for this Colombia national team, where he's still very important to the squad, but has sort of no domestic production whatsoever. So some people will kind of think that that's something to kind of scoff at, but still the World Cup qualifying campaign for him was really, really good. And actually he was still in the recent friendly where he started able to get an assist. So I think the key thing with James is that as long as he gets 65 minutes, he's a good pick, and if he's in the scouting bonus, he remains a green pick. A lot of these picks, like for example, James Rodriguez, I'll call out if I only think they deserve to be in the green tier if they're within the scouting bonus. So for example, someone like Granit Xhaka is also on that threshold where he's also someone who's like an all-action man for Switzerland, could take some element of penalties, but Mbolo is there as well, and could take free kicks. He has much more sort of national team production compared to, let's say, his underlying stats for Sunderland. They're not amazing though. So as I said, I think Granit Xhaka is very much a punt on sort of, if you feel really confident that he's on penalties, that makes him definitely a green pick for me if he is below that scouting bonus tier. But otherwise, I probably wouldn't actually have him as a top option. I probably would have him as a yellow pick. And James, I think, is maybe on the precipice of being a yellow, like a green pick, if you think his minutes are better than I think. But I would also have him as a yellow pick if he was not in scouting bonus. With McTominay, I think he's just about there. He's more so someone that I would angle for a matchday one kind of punt. As the main talisman for Scotland with a really, really good game. So having the talisman there and a potential penalty taker in Scott McTominay, I think is absolutely massive. The way that I kind of see it as well is he's probably the only Scotland attacker that, looking outside in, I would probably be super comfortable picking, because unfortunately the other picks would be the forwards, or if you go really rogue, as I said, with some of the midfielders. But the forward options, you're kind of competing against some other massive guns where maybe you actually feel like you'd want to still keep them for match day 2, or for example, like from a match day 1 punt perspective, you probably still would want to have someone like Haaland over, let's say, a Shanklin, for example, or even a Che Adams. Savitzer, I think, is absolutely fantastic. Not a great match day 2, so kind of similar to McTominay in the sense, but he also has scouting bonus. So I think that's a huge benefit towards him as a pick. Once again, he's a player very much like James, who doesn't really have much production at the domestic level, but is just a fantastic player for Austria. The key thing with Sabitzer is actually under the Ralf Rangnick tenure, I think his goal involvements per game is more close to around that sort of threshold of around like 75%, 0.75. So he's much more productive under Rangnick, and that has not really changed. Baumgartner has also left the team, so there's much more of an attacking onus on someone like him. Vargas is a great differential for Switzerland. You're pretty much banking here that the punt with Vargas is not that he's an extremely high ceiling player, but rather he is someone who does and can get involved for Switzerland, who have 2 really good fixtures on paper. So it's kind of like punting maybe. If you knew, for example, Pedro Neto was going to start 2 games for Portugal, not that I'm saying he will, like he would actually be quite a good punt if you were quite confident about that. Not that he is like an extremely high ceiling player. You'd still go with the likes of Ronaldo. You'd still go with the likes of Bruno if you're going for Portugal here. But as I said, if someone has kind of guaranteed minutes, and he does have this for Switzerland, he becomes quite a good pick. Nusa I've actually dropped, unfortunately. I still think that the Norwegian punt for matchday 1 is really, really electric. But I still probably prefer players like maybe a Sabitzer or McTominay, who I kind of think on paper should be on penalties and things like that too. So there's more sort of chances at getting that goal share compared to, let's say, Nusa, who's a little bit more of a, sort of an open player in your ability to get returns versus Iraq. So that's kind of why I've dropped Nusa right now, because also you probably don't really want him for match day 2. With, let's say, Arias, for example, it's really nice that in the previous friendly, he actually just got 2 goals. He actually hasn't scored that many goals for the Colombian national team. Maybe I'm overrating him a touch. I had him previously as a differential option. I've now moved him up. I just think his minutes will be really good for Colombia, and that the goal share is really positive for Colombia as well. And they're one of the teams that I'm fairly confident will do well versus the kind of opposition that they actually have in the group. So I'll be keen to kind of see how he does. He's also someone who has really good underlying stats when it comes to his numbers in the Brazilian league. And of course, he had a really poor Premier League season, but I think at the end of the day, we know that international football is sort of a different sort of level of quality. And also, I think the Premier League is extremely tough to actually get production in. Jean is really only a differential punt here. He's actually quite an attacking player compared to, let's say, a Vitinha. So I think because he's so much more goal threat orientated as a midfielder, he becomes quite an interesting sort of box-to-box pick. I quite like him just from the differential punt piece. I don't really like him otherwise. Bruno Guimaraes is someone who I think will be on a couple set pieces. We've seen him on corners as well, scored in the most recent friendly as well. I think that Brazilian fans, aren't super fond of him. I think they want Danilo to play over him. At least I think that's the conception or kind of understanding that I'm getting up until the previous friendly. But I still think that he probably, on balance, might have a little bit more threat than Casemiro, who, of course, is an awesome set piece player. But maybe I prefer Bruno still in terms of like open play and stuff like that. As far as, let's say, that next tier, I've got McGinn, Modric, Araujo, and Ruiz. I think with Ruiz, I don't think his minutes are necessarily guaranteed to be good for Spain. I could be wrong, and maybe the Spanish midfield is Pedri, Ruiz, and Rodri, but I think it's kind of unlikely that Spain would set up with such a sort of defensive, 3 midfield setup there, where maybe I still think for the fixtures in Matchday 1, Matchday 2, it's more likely that someone like Olmo will play in the 10, or you actually have an established kind of 10 profile in the game, as opposed to playing, two more central midfield profiles or even deep lying playmaker type profiles in Pedri. McGinn, I think, could have penalty share, and of course maybe set pieces as well. But I still think that that's kind of asking for a lot, and I don't think he's kind of like the way that I'd punt in Matchday 1. I'd much prefer someone who's kind of the talisman of their team. So when you kind of look at McGinn's numbers for the national team, it's not amazing. So I'd probably kind of skip past him as a pick. Whereas with Modric, I do think he's a bit of a talisman for sure for Croatia, and you saw him still scoring a goal at his sort of fine wine age. But yeah, the fixtures for Croatia to start with are quite tough. You'd probably actually angle him as a Matchday 2 transfer if you really wanted to, because I think he'll become an interesting differential for that game week. For Araujo, I just think his national team numbers are very, very poor. I've seen some projections for him that seem very confident in his sort of abilities to sort of produce. I'm just a little bit pessimistic in Uruguay, and maybe I'm wrong, because at the end of the day, the fixtures are really good, and you should be playing for fixtures. But sometimes I do like to also look at the national team production, and I'm a bit sort of cold on that, because he doesn't have much goal threat, and it's a lot of sort of relying on things like assists, and maybe ultimately some people would probably look at him and think he's better than Arias on paper. So I wouldn't really mind if someone wanted to go for him as a punt, because at the end of the day, he's in scouting bonus. Arguably, you can probably see him as like a bit more of a yellow tier pick. In the next tier, I actually have a lot of green options. Sane has come up as an option because, first of all, he scored in the previous friendly, and he's now back in the team because of the Carl injury, which is very unfortunate. I think the fact that they replaced Carl with Odrego also kind of helps with the Sane sort of right wing piece. So I think that kind of helps with like allowing him to kind of keep his minutes relatively nailed. I'm not sure if he's necessarily going to start Matchday 2, but I think as things kind of stand now, he becomes a really interesting punt for a Matchday 1 perspective. As far as, let's say, Çalhanoğlu, he's kind of like that all action man, very much like Granit Xhaka, a much better ball striker as well. I mean, his kind of like catalog of goals for Inter Milan over the years have been absolutely incredible, even from deep positions. So he becomes a very exciting pick just from that perspective. Valverde is a very good talisman. I think he's kind of like McTominay in the sense that he's the all-action man for Uruguay. When kind of required to be the more attacking player, he absolutely is able to produce that. The key thing that makes McTominay stand out for me is his NPXG numbers are really good. Valverde's role for Real Madrid is a bit different, of course, compared to, let's say, McTominay's role from Napoli. But I think the key thing is he should be on penalties, he should be on free kicks and corners, and that kind of makes him step up. And with two really good fixtures, I still really like him as a pick. With Wirtz, for example, it's just kind of a punt on Matchday 1. He's on set pieces as well. Kind of hard to go against Wirtz as a pick at the price point that he's at. But I can certainly understand why someone might want to like skip past him, because they might see him as a Matchday 2 transfer anyways. De Bruyne is the all-action man for Belgium. As much as his sort of domestic numbers have dropped, and I think, of course, there's a drop in quality of him as a player as well. He's no longer sort of producing chances at the volume that he was at Man City in his prime. But that doesn't quite matter, because I still think international play, as I said, the level's a little bit lower. We've seen, for example, more veteran players also kind of pull out very good established performances. I don't think he'd be a stranger to doing that. In the next tier, I actually have Pulisic as well. He was actually previously a scouting bonus player, so I was actually ready to have him as a green option. But unfortunately, I guess a lot of the Americans have logged on and probably picked Pulisic, and that sent him above the scouting bonus, which, as I said, kind of makes me a bit pessimistic for him as a pick. I would only classify him as a yellow tier pick now. He has really good underlying stats, to be fair, and his national team numbers are absolutely fantastic. So, some people might actually view him as more of a kind of green pick. I think there's a bit of pessimism too, just in terms of like what is, I guess, the exact level of the U.S. men's national team, because of course a lot of the performances over the last few years have not been great, but then they've looked relatively competent within the friendlies too. So depending on sort of where your expectation is at with the U.S. team, I think that kind of also has an impact in terms of how you feel about Pulisic as an option. With Yildiz, he has scouting bonus. He's a very good ball striker. Had a pretty quiet sort of, I think, end to the season for Serie A. But is, as I said, because he's kind of sort of a top ball striker, decent-ish fixtures from the perspective of Turkey. I still think that makes him an interesting option just because of scouting bonus, but otherwise I probably wouldn't touch him at all. Similar to kind of why Goulet is going to be a differential option this time round. With Doku, I see him as a differential. I prefer KDB. I like set pieces and all that sort of action. Yes, Doku's national team numbers are actually really good, but De Bruyne's are better at the end of the day, and I think that's why things like penalties, set piece share really does matter, because it's also something like chance creation. So if, for example, someone like De Bruyne is ultimately creating more chances than Doku, then that's going to be better. With Enzo, I still think I have him as a yellow tier pick. I'm not sure his like sort of catalog for Argentina is that good. So as you can see, of all the players in this sort of price bracket, the national team production is not that high. But we do know that he's had a markedly improved Premier League season in terms of goals and assists and all these sorts of things. So I think that kind of really kind of elevates him as a player, and hopefully you'd have better expectations for how he's able to deliver in terms of the production of things for Argentina this tournament. With Odegaard, I've actually added him as a pick. I just think he's exciting as a scouting bonus option. It seems like he might creep out of the scouting bonus, which would kind of drop him down for me as a pick. He has great national team numbers as well. Not as good as you probably would think. At the end of the day, Haaland has incredible goal share, and it's not like Odegaard's the one assisting every single goal. So yeah, that's pretty much it on Odegaard. Goulet, Bernardo Silva, I'm kind of cold on. And with Williams, I'm kind of concerned that he might not start Matchday 1, which would obviously kind of reduce the expectation for him to be a good pick in Matchday 1. He's probably more someone who could easily climb up this cheat sheet if we felt really confident about him and his minutes in Matchday 2. In the next tier, we have Musiala, who is just going to be a punt mostly on that sort of fixture versus Curaçao. Versus with Luis Diaz, for example, he's just going to be a talisman for 2 games. I think he's a little bit underrated in that a lot of people are actually choosing to, let's say, pass up on Colombia because they're quite scared that they're the final game. I think it's slightly weird because the goal projections for Colombia are really good. I don't think there's any reason to kind of scoff at that and to kind of think that they're not able to deliver that. His national team numbers are still very, very strong for the most part. Yes, Colombia are a little bit more of a defensive team. I think the national team numbers are also a bit tougher because within sort of South American qualification, things like that, a lot of the games that you might play are going to be quite tough, right? When you're matched up versus Brazil and Argentina, you don't have those kind of like super one-sided fixtures all the time. And at least Colombia sort of don't play towards that extent, but he does have a huge amount of sort of goal and assist share. Right now, when I kind of look at bookies odds, he's actually still the #1 favorite for Colombia to score the most goals, which is kind of why, as I've been sort of responding to people in terms of the forwards video, I wouldn't be super confident in, let's say, Luis Suarez as a pick, given that Luis Diaz is expected to still score more goals than him and is a midfielder anyways. So that's kind of where I have Luis Diaz. Rafinha is someone who actually finally got an assist within his previous friendly. I think people are pessimistic about him because some of the roles that he's played for the national team under Carlo Ancelotti have not been very good looking. On paper, he's still the penalty taker for the team. He's actually 18-1 in penalties, which is actually the best record the national team has. So that's better than Igor Thiago's, who's done really well in the Premier League this season. That's better than Vinny Jr.'s penalty record as well. So I think he should be taking penalties 100% when he's on the pitch. And I think that really does inflate his goal ceiling. His domestic numbers are also fantastic. His national team numbers actually historically still are very good, even though he has some criticism. And I still think that makes him an interesting option. The only problem, of course, as we know with all the Brazilian picks, is Matchday 1 Morocco. So I think he's an option that a lot of people are angling for a Matchday 2 transfer. It really just comes down to risk preference, like in terms of, do you want to book a transfer, do you not want to? And that's what it comes down to. Bruno, I think, is just an absolute sort of all-action pick. Been one of the best players in the world this season. Extremely high ownership, and just has 2 really good games on paper, where I think the expectation with Bruno when you compare it to Ronaldo is, yes, of course, he's probably going to score less goals than Ronaldo, but are we 100% sure that Ronaldo's going to play perfect minutes in the group stage? I'm not quite so sure. We'll have to see sort of how Martinez manages that, but Bruno, I think, is kind of impervious to that. So that makes him an exceptional option for myself. As far as, let's say, Turkey, I think the problem is him and Doué are probably the ones on the precipice for this French team. So it's very possible that, let's say, Turkey could start one game, Doué could start one game, as we've seen in the friendlies so far. Turkey has scored, for example, in the friendlies, but I still think that, once again, they could opt to go with Doué because he's more of a traditional wing player, and it kind of, is something that affects, let's say, Dembele positionally as well, right? And where he kind of sits on the pitch, or even Olise. So we'll have to kind of see how Deschamps sort of reacts to that going forward. As far as, let's say, the Pedri and Bellingham side of things, I think, Pedri and Bellingham are fantastic players. Bellingham is obviously clearly much more of a goal threat, but I still think there's some doubts about sort of Bellingham's minutes, and I do find that odd. But I guess under Tuchel, it's not 100% clear that Bellingham's going to play an extremely key role for the team just yet. So I find it hard to sort of judge that myself as someone who's sort of on the outside looking in for this English national team. I would probably have Bellingham at least as a yellow pick. I previously had him there, but I still can't shake the feeling that it's very likely that his minutes are not perfect in this side compared to, let's say, perfect within the Southgate side. So, yeah, for me, Bellingham drops. For Pedri, he's just more of a deep line playmaker at the end of the day. Sure, of course, he can get involved in a Spanish team that have projected goals of around 3 per match, but he's definitely not the way that I'd kind of like tackle going for Spain. And then at the same time, his ownership's really, really high. So not really even worth it from a scouting bonus point of view. As far as, let's say, the Knicks tier, I've made Elise a green pick, and he is absolutely exceptional as a player. I mean, I just watched the friendly versus Northern Ireland, and the national team numbers are there as well. He's had an absolutely breakout year again in the Bundesliga, where he kind of took his numbers up to another level. We know Real Madrid are sort of in for him. I don't know. I mean, I would never sort of bet that he's going to outscore Mbappe or that he's going to, out produce compared to, let's say, Mbappe. But he is a midfielder. And I can understand people getting tempted because I certainly am. So yeah, Elise absolutely up there as a green tier pick. Yamal, I'm a little bit more pessimistic about his matchday 1 minutes. I think De La Fuente's recent comments were a little bit more pulled back. Like, so in previous press conferences, I think he's sort of been mentioning that Yamal looks like he's ready for matchday 1, but now he's kind of also mentioned that that they might that he expects them to feature, but doesn't know whether they'll start. So we've gone back to that sort of pessimistic stage where I think, once again, if Yamal starts 2 games, he's a green tier pick. We know that, but I don't think he will. So that's why he's a yellow tier pick for now. Probably more of a match day 2 transfer or a 12th man in match day 2. For Dembele, I just think his production for France just isn't quite good enough for me. As much as he is an absolutely world-class player and has crazy underlying stats. So for me, he's just a yellow pick. With Vinny Jr., kind of a similar situation, I suppose. But this is sort of projected to be like his team as well, under Ancelotti as well, specifically under Ancelotti too. So I'd still, keep my confidence super high on Vinny, but still he's quite expensive. And I probably would, as I said, save him for a match day 2 or a 12-man pick. With Saka and Salah, not so interested from them from a group stage perspective. So we're just going to skip through towards the forwards now. As far as the forwards, I've made a couple changes, but not too dramatic. Ener Valencia for me is one of the top budget options. I kind of explained why I feel like I'm not super high on Suarez. His national team numbers are really good per 90, but keep in mind he's also not a 90-minute player for the national team. So, you kind of have to kind of reflect that some of these players here are more 90-minute players, so their per 90 numbers mean a little bit more. And he doesn't have penalties, which means that I'm just not super confident in him as a pick. Taremi is actually another great option that I really like for a budget price point. So is Balogun, but I think he's not on penalties, so that's something that kind of detracts from him a little bit as a pick. But he's had some really good numbers for the U.S. men's national team. Dzeko and Ndoye, probably not so interested because Ndoye is kind of like an out-of-position player in a bad way. And then Dzeko, I still don't have amazing sort of feelings about like how Bosnia is going to perform in this tournament, so I'm a little bit cold on him, unfortunately. As I said, Taremi might be a bit more interesting, but still you have match day 2 Belgium, so I can understand why people might be pessimistic. I've now added Jimenez to the cheat sheet. I've kind of thought about it a little bit more, especially kind of looking back at his minutes in terms of the fixtures for Mexico. I think as long as he has good minutes, and I think he will have good minutes, and he's in scouting bonus at the end of the day with kind of the home bonus as well of Mexico, and that how that kind of inflates the kind of goal total. I think that sort of makes Jimenez and Jonathan David as fantastic picks. So both of these options have been sort of upgraded to that green tier. We are fully sort of believing the North American juice here. With Depay, we've kind of like docked him far down. With Mbolo, I think he's a top option. A lot of people have kind of sort of giving me comments about his visa situation. I think that's been resolved. I think he's actually joined up with the team. From what I understand, I'm pretty sure he was actually with the Swiss team in the previous friendly, but maybe he hasn't been able to train so much, which is why I think he didn't really appear in that game. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but I think he should be fine to start match day 1, and I think he's a fantastic pick. Darwin, sort of, once again, he's not scored a goal for Uruguay since 2024, but if he was going to do it, I think it would be versus either Saudi Arabia or Cape Verde. So that's my thoughts on Darwin Nunez. I don't think he's on penalties, which is a bit of a detriment to him. Havertz, to me, is probably the most exciting pick, especially if you want to kind of target match day 1. Interestingly, I also think he's a very good option for a a 12th man, right? So for example, let's say if your preferred German captain is going to be someone like Kimmich, like why not consider maybe a Havertz 12th man as well if you prefer to keep Haaland in your team as a placeholder for someone more expensive. At the same time, I also probably would feel better about keeping Haaland for match day 2 compared to, let's say, Havertz for match day 2, but I could be wrong. As far as the next tier, I've actually docked Ueda down a little bit. I just think, once again, his minutes are not perfect, so I probably kind of like overreacted to some of his sort of production levels for the national team. As I said, like per 90 stats are really good looking, especially for players who don't play per 90 or 490s. And so, yeah, kind of had to sort of sense check my expectations there. As far as Pratik, Schick, Son, even Gakpo, these are options where I think these are players on penalties. These are talismans for their teams. It seems like with Depay, I think his role for the Dutch team is probably not going to be as prominent as it was before. Hence why I've given Gakpo a bit of a soft upgrade. I just don't really love their fixtures. With Schick and Son, I still think, yes, of course, they're the talismans for their teams. Yes, they're the most likely player to actually score for their teams. But still, at the end of the day, I would choose fixtures that are much better and much more clear on paper in terms of the gap. I think the forward is a position where I would like to spend the most money on players, because I think there's a much larger gap between the sort of top level players and some of the budget players. I'm not saying that that necessarily is sort of correlated. So have a look at my strategy video for how I truly feel about the price efficiency of certain players. But yeah, I still think I just wouldn't quite go for Schick, Son as much as the scouting bonus is interesting. Same with Gakpo too. With Gyökeres, similar thoughts where I think the penalty taking aspect of things is actually like absolutely massive for, you know, how you kind of rate his expectations. Compared to Isak, he's actually someone who I think is projected still to score more goals than Isak in the tournament. I think he's probably more fitter than Isak as well. So I have him here as a differential too. With Oyarzabal, with Lamine Yamal's minutes reducing in terms of expectations, that just makes Oyarzabal much better as an option, because that just means more penalty share for him. Lautaro Martinez, I've noted that he's taken penalties when Messi's off the pitch, so I do think that he gets a small little rise for me, especially since I think he'll start the games anyways for Argentina, and he is in scouting bonus, so that makes him interesting. But that's sort of where I'm at right now with Lautaro Martinez. I think maybe depending on how we understand Messi's minutes to be in the group stages, like we could change our mind, but for now, I think Messi's most likely going to play. So that doesn't necessarily make Lautaro's scream as a much better option, especially if he's going to lose, you know, minutes of penalty share, that kind of stuff. Alvarez, I've also kind of kept at that orange tier. Same with Isak. As far as that sort of top level of players, I still feel very fond about sort of Messi as an option. Key thing here is that, yes, you don't get chance created points as a forward, but at the end of the day, he still takes a lot of shots for someone, even though they're sort of lower XG shots. As long as he can get them on target, he'll be able to get those points too. He's a much more assistive player compared to any of the other options here. So he's a multi-pronged threat in that sense, and that can kind of raise his projected points as well. The market seems to be responding very positively towards Argentina and kind of their chances within even the group stages and their chances to do exceedingly well. So because of that, I feel really confident keeping Messi where he's at. With Haaland, Mbappe, Kane, it's kind of hard to separate them. I think Haaland ultimately has the best match day 1. Mbappe and Kane are more viewed as tough for match day 1, but good for match day 2 type options. I still think maybe Mbappe is a touch better than Kane on paper over match day 1 and match day 2 combined, but there's not a huge gap for me to kind of to say that there's a huge kind of change in expectation. With Ronaldo, of course, he has better fixtures, but as I said, I do think that his minutes might not be absolutely perfect this time round, and I do wonder if Martinez is going to kind of manage his minutes a little bit better over the group stages, just to kind of keep Ronaldo fit as well. So that's the only kind of pessimism I have towards, let's say, Ronaldo compared to even arguably the likes of Messi, who you can make the same argument for. Maybe I'm actually wrong, and to be fair, you might even have, let's say, Messi as a yellow tier pick. But something I probably will say is still, like, when you kind of look at, yes, the Saudi League, yes, the MLS, I mean, Messi's sort of goal involvements per 90 compared to, let's say, Ronaldo's, even like this season or last few seasons, has still been a pretty sizable gap, right? So that's kind of something that I don't love. As far as the defenders to round off here, this has been a pretty long video, but not too many changes in this position, because I feel like we got it fairly right the first time round. And defenders are always less variable compared to attackers, because with defenders, you're kind of just looking at the clean sheet being the sort of main predominant value behind, let's say, a pick. So for me, Mojica and Ordóñez are fantastic options, because the clean sheet odds for Colombia and Ecuador are fantastic, and they're actually continuing to go up and up. With Soufal, I think I was probably a bit harsh on him. I'd probably have him actually as a yellow tier pick. We also have a new Canadian option as well as a cheap differential. I probably wouldn't go for him, but I guess he can once again be a glue to a lot of people's draw. So here we go. In terms of the next tier of players, I actually have added Muller Wolfe to that sort of top tier just because of the scouting bonus piece of it. Ryerson is clearly the much more attacking threat. Interestingly, of course, Wolfe's national team numbers per 90 are better, but I think he also plays less minutes. So just keep that in mind. Once again, going back to that argument of 90s versus actually playing 90s. Oliveira, I think, is probably one of the more underrated punts in the game in terms of a good access and good way to get to the Uruguay defense without actually getting worried about whether he's going to start or not. Elvedi, same case there, where he's much cheaper than Akanji. Same with Davin Sanchez compared to, let's say, Munoz, where he actually has a lot of goal threat. So when I'm kind of looking at the center backs and their projected goals, Sanchez actually seems to be someone who actually rates really, really highly on that tier. Pacho is a bit more expensive compared to Ordonez, but I still think he's a very solid pick. And even at that price point, as long as he's in scouting bonus, he's going to be a good option. Tagliafico, as I mentioned before, I think he's probably more safe to get 2 starts than the fullbacks on the right back position with Molina and Montiel. With Varela, he's probably going to play right back for Uruguay. I don't think he's necessarily nailed because sometimes he does get subbed off a little bit earlier, so that's why I'm a little bit more pessimistic towards him as a pick. With Kadioglu, I think the clean sheet odds are much worse, but he, on paper, is a much more attacking fullback compared to, let's say, some of the other options that we have on paper, and of course can even play even more attacking roles for the team because he's so positionally flexible. With Otamendi, I think he's nailed for Argentina, and actually is probably a very, very good pick. I think looking back in the history of sort of national team kind of selections for Argentina, there was a time period where Otamendi was not starting ahead of, let's say, if Lisandro Martinez Romero was available, he might be benched at times. So I do wonder if that's going to happen because, of course, Otamendi is an extremely old player. I'd like to see whether that changes, but I still think he's actually fine. Molina, as I said, for the rotation reasons, I've probably been a little bit cold on him on. I know people love him for the goals that he scored, especially in the previous World Cup, but that's pretty much it, right? For the most part, he's not that attacking of a player, especially even like compared to Tagliafico. In the next tier, I still have Gonzalo Ignacio as a very top option. I know people have mentioned that he could be rotated. I still think it's more likely that Diaz could get rotated a bit more. I'm happy to kind of, take the flak on that because I just think as a younger player, he's probably more ready and more likely to actually be fit to play multiple games compared to maybe someone like Diaz who you might want to rest a bit more. With Hincapié, I think he's an amazing pick. He probably is nailed in that left back position or even left center back for the Ecuadorian team. I'm a little bit colder in Estupiñán, which is why I've dropped him. I think there's an aspect of Estupiñán can definitely start one of the 2 games in Matchday 1 and Matchday 2, but I think if he is prone to potential rotation in Matchday 1, then that kind of makes him a slightly worse option. And you can kind of see the previous friendlies for Ecuador as a good example for his minutes might not be perfect. With Johan Vasquez, I think him and many of the other Mexican picks are very good. He probably is the pick that I like the most because I think in terms of goal projections, he probably has the best ones from the sort of center back options. And he did score recently within a friendly. For Munoz, as I said, with the scouting bonus video that I put out, I think we kind of saw the value of how scouting bonus, works in terms of like the average case projection. So as I said, also with Munoz playing within a right back position, and when you kind of compare the NPXGI per 90 domestically versus his national team numbers, it makes a lot more sense to have a little bit more of a conservative expectation on someone like Munoz, simply because he's not going to be as attacking as you probably think he's going to be. And then the scouting bonus is really sort of strong in terms of teams like Colombia, who are a little bit underrated now in terms of ownership. For Brown, I've added him as an option, but he's absolutely, of course, going to be an asterisk. O'Reilly is an extremely attacking player, but I still also wouldn't be super confident about sort of maximizing the value with no scouting bonus versus Croatia and Ghana. Same with Konsa as well. De Kuiper, I am a little bit concerned with that sort of most recent benching. So I've gone a little bit, inconfident about his minutes overall. I think it's possible that Belgium were just sort of also rotating their defense, but I would still put an asterisk towards him because I still think he's a bit of a risky pick. Very kind of similar to Estupiñán in that sense. In that sort of next tier, I would actually have Cubarsí, Cucurella as the more nailed Spanish defenders. I think that simply comes down to kind of when just looking at the history of the national team and kind of, I think there's an element that Spain could rotate in Matchday 2, but I think it's more likely that Spain will kind of want to just secure qualification early on and probably get the job done with players like Cubarsí and Cucurella. As long as they're fit and sort of doing well, I think they're more likely to be kind of subbed off a little bit earlier in matches as opposed to not starting at all in, let's say, a match day 2. With Schlotterbeck, I actually think he's probably the better punt to go with. If you're actually going to go double Germany defense, I think this is the best way to approach it. Go Schlotterbeck and Kimmich, because I think Schlotterbeck is much better attacking threat compared to Jonathan Tah, who's a little bit lower than him. With Teo Hernandez, I've actually dropped him a tier because I do think Luka Dean is going to play a lot of minutes. If you kind of look at the World Cup qualifying campaign, look at the friendlies for France, they always rotate every 3 days between Teo Hernandez and Dean. I think that can happen between match day 1 and match day 2, especially over the Iraq game. That's probably a good Luka Dean game there. With Akanji, I think he's so close to, creeping out of the scouting bonus. He would probably drop towards an orange pick for me. With James, I think you have to be sort of super confident in his minutes, because that's the problem, right? Can James really play 3 fixtures in a row or even 2 fixtures in a row? Kind of feels a little bit hard to believe, but we'll see what happens with England. So I'm a little bit undecided in terms of how to treat him as an option. Upamecano has dropped back into scouting bonus territory. So I think that kind of makes him a green tier pick. But we'll have to kind of monitor that situation, because I do think that I'm trying to make this video with the assumption that he's probably someone who's going to creep back over the scouting bonus territory. But for now, he could be an underrated green pick if you're listening to the video. Doan is an interesting attacking fullback option, or even sort of winger type option for the team. He plays a very sort of flexible role, and has really, really good underlying stats as well. So I think he's a little bit of a problematic kind of pick, similar to De Kuyper, where maybe he's actually more nailed for starts, but he's also an early substitute in a lot of games. So that's not exactly a huge positive, but he is very much a punt purely because of the attacking threat, more so than, let's say, clean sheet odds for Japan being any good. Not super high on Diaz and Guehi. And then for the final premium defenders, I really think Kimmich and Gabriel are absolutely the best. I think with Llorente, it's probably possible that, someone like Porro could actually start match day 2, which is why I'm a little bit down on him. I think with Laporte at his age, I'm not sure if he starts 3 fixtures in a row, especially once again, if we're going to rotate a little bit in match day 2 for Spain. So that's kind of why I've actually dropped my expectations on Laporte. With Nuno Mendes, of course, he's an extremely attacking player, but I still think that scouting bonus is so good in the defensive position. I probably would only want to have Kimmich right now as my true premium alongside Kukurea, and maybe all the other players. I would actually still be happily choosing 3.5 players to 4.5 players to 5 million players within the scouting bonus right now as defenders to go over even the likes of Nuno Mendes. And then with a lot of the Netherlands options, unfortunately, clean sheet odds are not amazing. I don't think even from an attacking point of view, these fixtures are that good, so I'm a little bit cold on that. Same with Hakimi, unfortunately, of course, with how the way their group works. I think Morocco will do well, but it's still, these are the 2 toughest fixtures front loaded, so it kind of doesn't really make sense to touch Hakimi as a pick until match day 3. So that's going to be the cheat sheet so far. As far as the goalkeepers, I just want to shout out that some of the best differential goalkeepers would be whoever's the Uruguayan goalkeeper. I think because there's potential rotation, I'm a little bit unconfident in calling who that is. I think Galindez looks fine for Ecuador, but it's still hard to say whether he's 100% nailed. Vargas seems nailed for Colombia, so he seems quite good. But I think it's mostly clean sheet odds looking at this with the goalkeeper piece, right? Crepeau has been an option who's been confirmed to start for Canada, so he's going to be an interesting option. You'll get the actual name of the Mexican starting goalkeeper through the lineups on the deadline match day 1. So far, it seems to be Rangel. I think it's been confirmed by the manager as well. So you have that as an option, but maybe Okoa can still come in match day 2. I think Rangel would have to drop a stinker, and it's quite unlikely that happens, but we can wait and see. And that's kind of it, right? There's even maybe, a Dutch goalkeeper, because of course there's a Verbruggen injury on the cards. So that could mean that a Dutch goalkeeper could be quite cheap. So maybe that's one way to kind of attack a differential. Nyland from Norway is another exceptional option as well. So maybe let's say you don't go for Ryerson and you want scouting bonus still. Maybe you can go Nyland instead of, let's say, even a Wolfe. So these are the kind of options you want to think about for the cheat sheet match day 1. As I said, I appreciate it's an extremely long video, but I did want to be as detailed as possible, and I hope you guys give us some support. Like the video, hype the video, and subscribe as well. Thank you so much for watching.